No way. Tell me it's not true, please. Anything but that. The millionaire faked being unconscious to uncover the truth surrounding him. His housekeeper was crying as she confessed a secret that could shatter his soul. That day, lying there unable to move, his world changed forever. Before we start the story, comment from where you're watching us. I hope you enjoy this story. Don't forget to subscribe. The sound of twisting metal was the last thing Matthew heard before darkness completely enveloped him on that gray morning on the highway. The sharp pain in his chest told him the impact against the steering wheel of his Mercedes had been brutal, possibly fatal, if he didn't get help soon. Through the haze of his intermittent consciousness, he could hear the sirens of ambulances approaching like a distant echo, promising uncertain salvation. His mind fought to stay awake, remembering the faces of his beloved children, Philip and Rebecca, waiting for him at home, unaware of the tragedy. Each breath felt like a battle won against death, a stinging reminder that his life hung by a very thin thread. The paramedics acted with frantic speed, shouting codes and orders that Matthew could barely understand in his total daze. He felt them pull him from the wreckage with precise but painful movements that sent electric shocks through his injured spine. The smell of burned gasoline and blood filled the air, creating a nightmare atmosphere he couldn't escape no matter how hard he tried. They loaded him onto the stretcher urgently, and the cloudy sky was the only thing his eyes saw before the ambulance doors closed. In that confined space, the sound of his own heart monitored by machines was the only rhythm tying him to the world of the living. The ride to the hospital was a confusing mix of flashing lights and jolts that vibrated every fractured bone in his battered body. Matthew tried to speak, to ask about his family, but the words drowned in his throat, unable to overcome the barrier of physical trauma. He thought of Edward, his business partner, and the confrontation that should have taken place that morning about the missing money in the company. The irony of fate hit him. He was going to demand justice, and now he was fighting to survive in a race against time. The loneliness in that ambulance, surrounded by strangers fighting for him, made him feel a vulnerability he'd never experienced in his millionaire life. Upon arriving at the emergency room, the white antiseptic light from the spotlights momentarily blinded him, forcing him to close his eyes against the intensity. He heard the organized chaos of the doctors, the metallic sound of instruments, and the authoritative voices directing the operation to stabilize him. Despite the chaos, a strange calm began to descend over him, a mental clarity contrasting with his body's immobility. He decided not to waste energy trying to communicate, letting the professionals do their work while he retreated inward. It was in that moment of forced stillness that his sharp sense of hearing became his only reliable connection to the outside world. While the doctors worked on his wounds, Matthew overheard a conversation on the other side of the curtain that chilled his blood more than the accident itself. Two nurses were reviewing his chart and commenting with disapproval about the call they'd just received from his wife. She didn't even ask if he was conscious or in pain. She just wanted to know about the severity, and the insurance one said with indignation, "It's unbelievable how cold some people are." "It seems she cares more about the inheritance than her husband's life," the other replied sadly. Those words stabbed into Matthew's mind like sharp daggers, planting the first seed of a terrible doubt. The physical pain took a back seat as his mind processed the information, remembering his family's insistence that he marry Valerie. It had only been 8 months since they'd had a discreet wedding, driven by the need to give his children a mother after the death of his first wife. Valerie had always seemed perfect, attentive, and affectionate, or at least that's what Matthew had wanted to believe in his desperation. Now, lying on a hospital gurney, the image of his ideal wife began to crack, revealing dark fissures. Had it all been an award-worthy performance designed to trap him in a moment of emotional weakness? He remembered the day he met Valerie at that corporate event in Manhattan, so elegant and full of life, contrasting with his own gray morning. She had known exactly what to say to fill the voids left by Patricia's death in his home. His children, Philip and Rebecca, seemed to accept her, though now Matthew questioned if that acceptance had been genuine or forced. Doubt is a slow poison, and in the sterility of that emergency room it began to course through his veins. He decided he needed to know the absolute truth without filters or social masks before making any drastic decision. The doctors returned with the final diagnosis: mild head trauma, multiple contusions, and fractured ribs, but nothing that permanently threatened his life. He heard them discuss transferring him home in a couple of days for absolute rest under private care. That's when the risky Machiavellian idea began to form in his brain like a necessary survival strategy. If everyone believed he was unconscious or in a vegetative state, no one would watch what they said around him. He'd be a spy in his own life, a silent observer able to see the true faces of those around him. He called Dr. Bellamy his longtime physician and loyal friend of over 15 years as soon as he was alone in the room. With a weak but firm voice, he explained his plan and asked for the strictest confidentiality in exchange for a generous donation to the hospital. "Matthew, this is crazy." "Ethically, it's complicated," the doctor said, hesitating at his patient's strange request. "I need to do it, Bellamy. My life and my kids' lives might depend on what I discover in these days," Matthew insisted. Finally, the doctor reluctantly agreed, promising to instruct the staff to maintain the narrative of minimal consciousness. The next 2 days in the hospital were a dress rehearsal for the grand performance Matthew was about to stage in his own home. He practiced total immobility, controlling his breathing to make it slow and rhythmic, relaxing every facial muscle. He learned to crack his eyes open just enough to see shadows and movements without seeming to focus. He endured the physical discomforts without complaint, preparing to become just another piece of furniture in his mansion. Anxiety gnawed at him inside, but outwardly he was the picture of utter defeat and extreme weakness. Valerie visited only once before the transfer, entering the room with poorly disguised impatience and expensive perfume. She didn't take his hand or stroke his forehead. She just stood at the foot of the bed, observing him coldly. Matthew heard the tapping of her nails on her phone screen as she sent endless texts. "I hope this doesn't last too long. I have plans that can't wait," she muttered to herself, thinking he couldn't hear. That phrase confirmed his worst fears and strengthened his resolve to carry out his plan to the bitter end. The day of the transfer arrived, and the movement of the gurney to the private ambulance was another torture for his sore, tense body. Upon arriving at his mansion in Beverly Hills, he felt the change in atmosphere. The air of his home, which should have been comforting, felt heavy and hostile. The nurses carried him carefully to his room on the second floor, placing him in his immense king-size bed. Valerie barked orders at the staff in a shrill voice, more concerned about them not dirtying the carpets than about his health. Matthew closed his eyes and immersed himself in his role, becoming a statue of flesh and bone. The room fell silent once the nurses left, leaving him alone with his thoughts and the faint hum of the air conditioner. It was strange to be in his own bed surrounded by his things, but feeling like an intruder in a parallel reality. He sharpened his hearing, trying to catch the sounds of the house, the footsteps in the hallway, the distant murmur from the kitchen. He wondered where his children were and why they hadn't come running to greet him as they always did. The absence of their laughter was an ominous omen that squeezed his heart more than any physical wound. Hours passed, and the afternoon began to fall, casting long shadows that danced on the ceiling. Matthew maintained his position, ignoring the cramps starting in his legs from lack of movement. He knew any slip, any involuntary twitch could ruin the whole plan and put him in danger. His mind replayed recent events over and over, searching for signs he'd ignored about Valerie's behavior. Betrayal hurts more when you realize the signs were always there, and you chose not to see them. Finally, the door burst open and Valerie entered, talking on the phone without lowering her voice at all. "He's here now. He looks like a vegetable. The doctors say there's not much hope he'll be his old self again," she said brazenly. Matthew felt a stab of anger, but forced his body to remain completely limp and his face expressionless. "Yes, Edward. I know, but we have to wait a bit longer to move the accounts without raising suspicions," she continued. His partner's name confirmed the conspiracy. His wife and business associate were allied against him. Valerie approached the bed and looked at him with a mix of disgust and triumph in her perfectly made-up eyes. "If only you'd died on the spot, everything would be so much easier for us, dear," she whispered near his ear. The cruelty of her words was a physical blow that Matthew had to endure without blinking or altering his breathing. She let out a short, dry laugh, turned on her heel, and left the room, leaving him with the confirmation of her evil. Now there was no turning back. Matthew knew he was sleeping with the enemy and had to be smarter than her. The night brought overwhelming loneliness, interrupted only by the sound of wind gently tapping the closed windows. Matthew thought of Patricia, his late wife, and silently asked her for strength to protect their children's legacy. He promised himself he wouldn't rest until he unmasked Valerie and Edward and made them pay for their betrayal. The impotence of not being able to get up and shout was psychological torture, testing his sanity every second. However, he knew patience was his only weapon in that moment of extreme vulnerability. Near midnight, he heard soft, hesitant footsteps approaching his door, very different from Valerie's authoritative heels. The door opened with a slight creak, and someone entered carefully as if trying not to disturb the air. It was Laura, the housekeeper, who approached the bed and adjusted his blankets with maternal tenderness. "Good night, Mr. Matthew. Rest well. I'll be praying for you," she whispered sweetly. That small act of humanity was a balm for his wounded soul amid so much darkness. Matthew fell asleep with that last image, the kind hand fixing his cover in the middle of the night. He knew the coming days would be a trial by fire, a chess game where he was the apparently fallen king, but he also knew he wasn't completely alone. There was goodness in his house even if it came from the least expected person. With that small hope, he surrendered to sleep, preparing to wake the next day and continue his charade. The war for his life and family had just begun in silence. Dawn filtered through the heavy velvet curtains, marking the start of Matthew's first full day as a prisoner in his own body. The dim light revealed the details of his luxurious room, which now felt more like a gilded cell than a sanctuary of rest. He kept his eyes closed while listening to the house wake up, identifying the routine noises of the staff. The aroma of fresh brewed coffee wafted up from the kitchen, awakening his appetite and reminding him he was still human. However, he had to ignore hunger and thirst until someone came to assist him maintaining his role perfectly. Valerie entered the room after 10 a.m., much later than she used to rise when he was active and working. She brought no breakfast or medicine, just her phone glued to her ear and an attitude of evident annoyance in her steps. She paced the room, opening drawers and rifling through personal documents Matthew kept in his nightstand with total impunity. "I can't find the safe code." This idiot was always paranoid about security, she complained to her invisible interlocutor. Matthew had to focus on a fixed point on the wall through his lashes to avoid betraying his growing fury. The woman continued rummaging through his belongings, tossing what didn't serve her onto the floor with absolute contempt for order and privacy. "Yes, Edward. I already checked the planner, but there's nothing written down. We'll have to call a locksmith or force it," she said impatiently. Matthew realized they didn't just want his money, they were in a hurry to seize everything before he could recover or die. Hearing them plan to loot his life while he lay there was a surreal and terrifying experience. Every word from Valerie was another piece in the puzzle of her betrayal, confirming she'd never loved him. At noon, Laura entered timidly with a tray containing broth water and the prescribed medications for his recovery. Unlike Valerie, Laura moved with almost reverential respect, asking permission even to enter the room of an unconscious man. "Excuse me, sir, I brought your lunch. Let's see if we can get you to eat a little," she said softly. With infinite patience, she helped him sit up slightly and fed him spoonful by spoonful, cleaning any drops that fell. Matthew felt immense gratitude toward this woman, who without blood obligation showed him more humanity than his own wife. While feeding him, Laura spoke to him quietly, telling him about the weather or how the birds were singing in the garden that morning. "You'll get better, Mr. Matthew. You're a strong man and God won't abandon you," she assured him with conviction. Her words weren't empty. They were loaded with genuine faith that pierced the barrier Matthew was building around himself. He noticed her rough hands from hard work, yet incredibly gentle when touching him, and felt ashamed for not noticing her before. Laura had always been an efficient shadow in the house, and now she was his only source of light. After feeding him, Laura proceeded to clean the room, picking up the mess Valerie had left scattered on the floor without a care. She did it silently, sighing occasionally as she saw the family photos of Matthew with his children that Valerie had flipped face down. She straightened the portraits carefully, dusting them as if restoring order to the family. "Poor kids. They don't understand what's happening," she murmured to herself, glancing at the door. Matthew felt a lump in his throat hearing her. Her concern for Philip and Rebecca was genuine and deep. Valerie returned in the afternoon this time, accompanied by unfamiliar heels that Matthew didn't recognize until he heard the voice. It was one of her friends, a high society woman she used to shop with and attend charity events for show. "Oh, girlfriend, what a terrible situation. But at least the house is divine," the woman commented frivolously, ignoring the sick man in the bed. "It's a burden, I swear, but soon all this will be mine. And I can remodel this awful room," Valerie replied, laughing. They talked about him as if he were an old piece of furniture getting in the way, soon to be discarded for something new. Matthew heard them criticize the decor, his taste in art, even the clothes he wore, mocking everything he was. He realized his marriage had been a farce not just for Valerie, but a joke to her entire social circle. The humiliation burned in his chest, but it fueled him to maintain his facade and plan his revenge meticulously. They drank champagne in his room, prematurely celebrating a victory Matthew was determined to snatch from their hands. The frivolity of their conversation contrasted violently with the gravity of his medical and emotional situation. When the women finally left for the club, the house fell into silence, soon broken by children's voices in the hallway. It was Philip and Rebecca whispering outside his closed door, debating whether to enter. "Mom, Valerie said we couldn't go in, that Dad looks scary like this," Rebecca said in a trembling voice full of fear. "But I want to see him. He's my dad, and I miss him," Philip replied, trying to be brave despite his uncertainty. Matthew felt his heart shatter into 1,000 pieces hearing how they'd been kept away from him with cruel lies. The door opened a crack, and 2 little heads peeked in cautiously, big, curious eyes exploring the dim room. Matthew kept his eyes half closed, watching them tiptoe in, as if profaning a sacred or dangerous place. They approached the bed, holding their breath, observing the bruises on his face and the bandages covering his head and chest. "Hi, Daddy," Philip whispered, barely touching his hand with a finger, fearing to break or wake him badly. That innocent contact was the most powerful energy surge Matthew had received in years, reminding him why he had to fight. Rebecca, smaller, climbed onto a chair to see him better and left a small, crumpled drawing on his motionless chest. "It's so, you get better fast." "I drew you with your superhero cape," she said in her sweet, sad little voice. Matthew had to use all his willpower not to open his eyes, hug them, and tell them everything would be okay. Tears welled behind his closed eyelids, burning like acid, but he didn't let any escape to avoid giving himself away. He promised he'd make up for every second of pain his children were feeling because of Valerie's coldness. Suddenly Laura's voice echoed from the door, soft but firm, calling the children so they wouldn't be discovered. "Kids, you know the lady gets mad if she sees you here." "Come with me to the kitchen," she said with protective affection. "But, Aunt Laura, we wanted to see Dad," Rebecca protested, climbing down from the chair reluctantly, with pouts. "I know, my love, but Dad needs rest to get strong. Come on, I made cookies for you," she convinced them. Laura got them out of the room before Valerie could return and punished them, acting as the shield Matthew couldn't be. The afternoon turned to night, and Matthew reflected on the dynamics he'd observed in his home in just 24 hours. Valerie was the villain of the story, the children, the innocent victims, and Laura, the silent heroine, holding everything together. He realized how blind he'd been, delegating parenting and affection to a woman who felt nothing for them. His supposed unconsciousness was opening his eyes to a reality that, awake and busy, he'd never have perceived. It was a painful but necessary lesson to rewrite his family's future before it was too late. Later, Edward called the room's landline, ringing stridently in the night's silence, startling Matthew. Valerie ran in to answer, making sure to lock the door as if the walls had ears. "Yes, I'm here with the lump. He doesn't move, doesn't do anything. It's pathetic," she said, looking at Matthew with absolute disdain. "I've already talked to the notary. He says if we get the permanent incapacity certificate, total control is ours in a month." Matthew memorized that detail. He had less than a month to act before losing legal control of his empire and his children. The conversation turned to travel plans. They talked about going to Europe, the Greek islands, spending the money Matthew had earned with so much effort. They laughed, imagining the luxurious life they'd have once they got rid of the burden and sent the kids to boarding schools. "Those brats have me fed up. As soon as this is over, we'll ship them to Switzerland and forget about them," Valerie decreed. That phrase was the final sentence for Matthew. Now there was no doubt, no mercy, no possibility of forgiveness for his wife. The woman he slept with was a monster capable of abandoning 2 small children without remorse. When Valerie finally fell asleep on the room's sofa, snoring softly, Matthew allowed himself to open his eyes fully in the darkness. He stared at the ceiling, mentally tracing the counterattack plan he'd execute in the coming days with surgical precision. He needed allies' evidence and, above all, to protect Laura, who was the only barrier between his children and abandonment. He felt like a general on the battlefield, wounded but not defeated, assessing the terrain before the final attack. The golden cage he lived in would soon become the trap where his enemies fell. The dawn of the second day found him awake, alert, and with a determination of steel forged in the fire of betrayal. He heard Laura enter again at 6 a.m., much before her time to check he was comfortable. She adjusted his pillow and whispered a quick prayer before going down to prepare breakfast for the children. Matthew knew then his fight wasn't just for money or revenge, but to restore true love in that house. And Laura, unknowingly, would be the key piece in rebuilding his shattered life. The day passed with the same routine of contempt from Valerie and loving care from the housekeeper. Each interaction was more evidence in his mental file against his wife and disloyal partner. Matthew began to move his fingers slightly under the sheets, exercising his muscles to avoid atrophy, preparing for the moment of action. He knew the road would be hard and painful, but the vision of a future free of lies drove him. He was ready to play the most dangerous game of his life, and this time he'd set the rules. The routine of deception settled in with painful precision during the first week of Matthew's return to his mansion. Valerie had turned the marital bedroom into her clandestine operations office, assuming her husband was deaf and mute. Matthew learned to recognize her different tones of voice, the sweet and fake for visitors, the sharp and cruel for the family. It was an anthropological study of human hypocrisy observed from the front row of a sickbed. Each passing day, the mask of the perfect wife slipped a bit more, revealing the rot beneath. One rainy afternoon, Edward came to visit Valerie under the excuse of bringing company documents for her to sign as temporary power of attorney. They entered the room, laughing with a familiarity that turned Matthew's stomach with disgust and contained rage. Look at him lying there. The great Matthew Sanders reduced to nothing. Edward mocked, standing by the bed and lightly tapping Matthew's leg. "Don't touch him. It gives me the creeps." "Better sign this quick and go have a drink in the living room," Valerie replied impatiently. Matthew had to endure the humiliation of being treated like an inanimate object by the man he'd trusted with his business. Edward pulled out papers and began explaining to Valerie how they were diverting funds to offshore accounts under the guise of operational losses. "It's brilliant, Valerie. No one suspects because everyone thinks the company is in crisis due to Matthew's absence. You're a genius, love. With that money, we can buy the house on the French Riviera we've always wanted," she celebrated, clinking her glass with his. They were dismantling Matthew's life legacy right under his nose, toasting to his misfortune with his own liquor. The audacity of their crime was so great that Matthew almost admired their stupidity for confessing it all in front of him. Matthew focused on memorizing the names of the shell companies and banks they mentioned: Delta, Investments, Cayman Islands Bank. Each detail was ammunition he stored carefully in his mind for when he could speak to his lawyers and the police. The financial betrayal hurt, but the personal betrayal of seeing his friend and wife conspiring together was a deeper wound. He remembered all the times Edward had dined at that house, playing with his children, pretending to be the fun, loyal uncle. It had all been an elaborate lie for years, waiting for the right moment to stab him in the back. "What do we do about the housekeeper?" "That Laura looks at me funny. I think she suspects something," Edward asked, suddenly lowering his voice. "Don't worry about that deadbeat. She has nowhere to go and needs the job. She won't say anything," Valerie dismissed arrogantly. "We should fire her as soon as we have total control." "I don't want any witnesses to what happened here," Edward suggested coldly. Matthew felt an instant protective impulse. He wouldn't let them touch a hair on Laura's head, who was the only loyal one in that nest of vipers. The conversation then shifted to details of the accident, revealing an even darker secret than the theft or adultery. "You were lucky the brakes failed right on that curve." "I thought maybe it wouldn't work," Valerie said in a chilling tone. "I told you I'm good with mechanics. A little adjustment and fate did the rest. Too bad he survived." Edward replied smugly. Matthew felt the world stop. It hadn't been an accident. They'd tried to murder him in cold blood, tampering with his car. The revelation shocked him, turning his anger into a primal, fierce survival instinct. Now he understood why Valerie showed no emotion. She was disappointed her widowhood plan had only partially failed. Matthew was a loose end, a breathing problem preventing them from accessing the full fortune immediately. Real fear gripped him. If they realized he was recovering, they wouldn't hesitate to finish the job right there in his own bed. He had to be more cautious than ever, feigning deterioration if necessary to make them drop their guard. Night fell, and Valerie went out to dinner with Edward, leaving Matthew alone with his mind racing at 1,000 miles per hour. He tried to move his legs harder under the blankets, testing his physical limits now that he knew his life was at stake. The pain was intense, but bearable compared to the adrenaline coursing through his veins from the certainty of the murder attempt. He was trapped, cut off in his own home, surrounded by mortal enemies sleeping under his roof. Laura entered later for her night round with red eyes and a sadness Matthew hadn't noticed so markedly before. She sat in the chair by the bed and sighed deeply, as if carrying the weight of the world on her tired shoulders. "Oh, Mr. Matthew, if you knew what's going on in this house, you'd get up right now," she confessed in a whisper. "Mrs. Valerie has no heart. She treats the kids like they're nuisances." Today, she yelled at Rebecca for crying. She continued venting. Matthew clenched his teeth. Knowing his children suffered emotional abuse was almost worse than knowing they'd tried to kill him. Laura took his hand and began praying the Lord's Prayer, asking for protection for him and the children amid so much evil. Her faith was unbreakable, a light in the darkness enveloping the mansion that gave Matthew a bit of peace. She adjusted his pillows gently, ensuring he was comfortable for the night, unaware he heard her. "Rest, boss. I'll take care of your little angels. I won't let that woman hurt them," she promised solemnly. That promise sealed a silent pact between them. Laura was his natural ally, though she didn't know it yet. The next morning, Matthew heard Valerie on the phone with a lawyer discussing the terms of mental incapacity. "I need you to draft the document now. I'll bribe whoever it takes to sign it fast," she ordered urgently. They were speeding up the proceedings, meaning Matthew's time was running out faster than he'd calculated. He had to find a way to communicate with the outside without alerting Valerie or her spies. The tension in the house was palpable, like a violin string stretched to the breaking point. During the day, Matthew observed Valerie trying on expensive clothes in front of the full-length mirror, completely ignoring his presence. She tried on black dresses, posing as if rehearsing to be the grieving, elegant widow at the funeral. "Do you think this looks good on me for the wake?" she asked the heir, laughing at her own macabre joke in front of her reflection. The image was grotesque, his wife planning his funeral while he watched from the bed where he supposedly agonized. Matthew felt deep repulsion for that woman he'd once thought would be his life partner. Valerie's cruelty knew no bounds. She even dared to bring in a decorator to plan how she'd remodel the room once he was gone. They talked about knocking down walls, changing furniture, and erasing any trace of Matthew's existence in his own sanctuary. "I want everything white and gold. Get rid of this outdated, depressing style of Matthew's," she instructed. They were erasing him from history, rewriting his life and legacy as if he'd never mattered. Matthew swore on his parents' memory he wouldn't let that happen while he had breath. That afternoon, Philip managed to sneak into the room again while Laura distracted Valerie downstairs with a household issue. The boy approached and left a small toy car on the nightstand, his most prized possession. "So you can drive away from here when you wake up, Dad," he whispered with heartbreaking innocence before running out. That little metal car became the symbol of Matthew's hope, a tangible reminder of why he had to fight. His children didn't just need him. They trusted he'd return, and he couldn't fail them. By the end of the week, the masks had fallen completely, and Matthew saw reality with brutal, painful clarity. He was surrounded by predators who wanted his money and his life, and his only defense was his wits and a housekeeper's loyalty. The battle was set, and though it seemed he had all the odds against him, he had the element of surprise. No one expects the corpse to rise from the autopsy table to accuse his killers, and that's exactly what Matthew planned to do at the moment and place that would hurt them most. Laura's presence in the house had become the only pillar holding up the sanity and emotional well-being of the family. While Valerie lived in her bubble of selfishness and criminal plans, Laura wove a net of love around the children and Matthew. Matthew noticed how she arrived earlier each day, sacrificing her own rest to ensure everything was in order before the lady woke. Her light steps were the first sign of life in the morning, a steady, reassuring rhythm amid the chaos. She didn't just clean and cook. She filled the emotional voids the tragedy had exposed in the mansion. Matthew observed through his half-open lashes how Laura cared for every detail of his surroundings with almost religious devotion. She dusted the furniture without noise, opened the curtains just enough for light without bothering his eyes, changed his sheets with a gentle technique, moving him delicately to avoid pain, always speaking respectfully. "Let's turn a bit, Mr. Matthew, so your back rests. You'll see how good it feels," she'd say. She didn't treat him like a terminal patient or a piece of furniture, but like a worthy human deserving comfort. But what moved Matthew most was witnessing the bond Laura had forged with Philip and Rebecca in his absence. The children, rejected by their stepmother and scared by their father's condition, had found refuge in the housekeeper's skirts. Often, Laura let them into the room when Valerie was out creating a small clandestine family sanctuary around the bed. They'd sit on the rug, and Laura would read stories, making voices for the characters and making them laugh quietly. Those moments of contained joy were the oxygen keeping Matthew's spirit alive in his voluntary confinement. One afternoon, Matthew heard a conversation that broke his heart and filled him with deep admiration for Laura. Rebecca asked Laura why her mommy Valerie didn't love them and why she was always angry. "It's not your fault, my dears. She has a heart that's a little sick, but you're wonderful," Laura explained tactfully. "But you do love us, right?" "And Laura?" Philip asked, needing confirmation. "I love you more than my life. You're my borrowed children, and I'll always take care of you," she replied, hugging them tight. Laura not only gave them affection but worried about their education and nutrition aspects Valerie ignored completely. She checked their homework at the kitchen table, helping with addition and subtraction with infinite patience. She prepared their favorite meals, ensuring they ate vegetables and fruits, nurturing their bodies as much as their souls. Matthew realized Laura was acting as a mother in every sense without the title or resources. She was filling the role Valerie had despised, doing it with naturalness and overflowing love. There was a day when Valerie brutally scolded Laura for letting the children into Matthew's room. "I told you I don't want those brats in here, they bother and bring dirt," Valerie yelled, not caring who heard. Laura lowered her head, accepting the insults humbly, but defending her position with silent bravery. "They just wanted to give their dad a kiss, ma'am. They miss him a lot," Laura replied in a trembling but firm voice. "Don't talk back, you idiot, or you're out on the street right now," Valerie threatened before slamming the door. Matthew felt volcanic fury seeing how they humiliated the only person truly worthwhile in that house. He wanted to get up and kick Valerie out, but he knew it wasn't the strategic moment to reveal himself. Laura, after the scolding, wiped her tears and approached Matthew to check the shouts hadn't disturbed him. "Sorry for the commotion, Mr. Matthew. Don't let those bad energies reach you. You rest," she said. Her ability to swallow her pride and pain to protect his peace was an act of everyday heroism. On another occasion, Matthew heard Laura singing a lullaby to Rebecca, who'd had a nightmare, and sought comfort. The melody was simple and sweet, a song Laura probably sang to her own daughter, sharing that maternal love. Rebecca calmed quickly, feeling safe in the arms of the woman who'd become her emotional anchor. Matthew memorized that melody. He promised himself he'd sing it to his daughter someday, honoring who taught it. Laura was saving his children's childhood, preserving their innocence against their stepmother's neglect. Laura also talked to Matthew when alone, telling him about her life, assuming he couldn't hear. She spoke of her daughter Camille, how smart she was, how she loved drawing and learning new things. "She's my sunshine, Mr. Matthew. I work hard, so she has a better future than mine, so she becomes a professional," she said proudly. Matthew learned Laura's dreams and hopes this way, humanizing her beyond her role as housekeeper. He discovered a fighter, a single mother and widow facing life with unbreakable dignity. The small details of Laura's care marked the abysmal difference between her and Valerie. Laura always ensured his lips were moist, put cream on his hands to prevent dryness, read the newspaper news so he didn't lose touch with the world, firmly believing he was in there. Valerie, in contrast, didn't even look him in the face. For her, Matthew was a logistical problem to solve. The comparison was odious but necessary for Matthew to reevaluate all his priorities and affections. One stormy night, the thunder scared the children, who ran to Matthew's room, instinctively seeking safety. Valerie wasn't home, probably with Edward, so Laura took them in on the rug by the big bed. "Don't be afraid. Dad's here watching over us even if he's asleep. He's like a lion resting," she told them to calm them. They stayed there, the three huddled, while Laura told stories to distract them from the storm's noise outside. Matthew felt protected by his own housekeeper and children, surrounded by pure love, needing no words. Matthew started feeling more than gratitude for Laura. It was a mix of admiration, respect, and growing affection. He realized she had all the qualities he'd wrongly sought in Valerie: kindness, loyalty, and selfless love. Laura's beauty wasn't in expensive dresses or jewels, but in the light of her eyes and the warmth of her hands. He was discovering the true value of people in the darkest moment of his life, a priceless lesson in humility. Laura was undoubtedly the guardian angel fate had placed in his path to save him and his family. As days passed, Matthew felt guiltier for keeping the deception from Laura, who suffered for him. He wanted to tell her he was okay, that he heard her, that everything would change soon, thanks to her. But fear of putting her in danger if Valerie found out kept him silent, biting his tongue. He knew Laura couldn't lie if Valerie questioned her. Her honesty was her greatest virtue and weakness. So he had to protect her by keeping her ignorant a little longer for everyone's good. The silent bond between the sick man and his caregiver strengthened with every gesture, every word of encouragement, and every shared tear. Laura sometimes cried for the situation, for the injustice of seeing a good man bedridden and surrounded by vultures. Those tears fell on Matthew's hand, burning his skin with the truth of a genuine feeling money couldn't buy. He swore every one of Laura's tears would be repaid with a life of happiness if he escaped that crossroads. She was the light in his gloom, the only reason the mansion hadn't collapsed completely into darkness. The chapter of Laura and Matthew's life was just beginning, but already the most important and transformative. She'd arrived as an invisible employee and become the beating heart of the home. Matthew knew when this ended, his relationship with her couldn't return to merely professional. She'd earned a place in his family and life by right, through love and sacrifice, and he was willing to fight the whole world to ensure she never had to cry again. Thursday morning started with an unusually tense atmosphere. The air in the mansion felt charged, foreshadowing bad news. Matthew heard Laura's footsteps climbing the stairs much before her usual time, but this time not light but hurried and clumsy. She entered the room almost breathless, as if she'd run a marathon, and closed the door behind her with trembling hands. She didn't greet with her usual sweetness. Her breathing was ragged and a contained sob was in her throat. Something terrible had happened, something that broke the always firm composure of the strong woman. Laura began her tasks mechanically, but the sound of objects falling betrayed her extreme nervousness. A medicine bottle slipped from her, and Matthew heard her curse under her breath, something she'd never done in his presence. She knelt to pick it up and stayed there on the floor, unable to rise under the weight of her invisible anguish. Matthew cracked his eyes open and saw her shoulders shaking violently. She was sobbing inconsolably. It wasn't common sad crying. It was the gut-wrenching cry of a mother facing the abyss. Laura's cell phone rang in her pocket, breaking the room's dense silence with a shrill tone. She wiped her face quickly, took a breath to steady her voice, and answered fearfully. "Yes, Dr. Torres, tell me please. I have the results." "I'm Camille's mom," she said in a broken voice. Matthew sharpened his hearing to the max. Laura's daughter's name and the doctor's title set off all his alarms. There was a long, painful pause as Laura listened to what was said on the other end, visibly paling. 3 months, Laura asked in a thread of voice that chilled Matthew's blood. But she was fine. It was just a headache. Matthew felt a punch to the gut. 3 months to live a death sentence for a little girl. Laura covered her mouth to stifle a scream of pure pain, hearing the medical confirmation of her worst nightmares. Life's fragility became present in the room, crushing any other problem or conspiracy Matthew had in mind. Laura stood and walked to the window, seeking air, as if suffocating within the 4 walls. "And how much does the treatment cost?" "Is there any chance?" she asked, desperately clinging to any burning nail. $280,000. She repeated the figure aloud, then collapsed again, this time into the armchair. For a housekeeper earning minimum wage and maintaining a home alone, that sum was an impossible mountain to climb. The desperation in her voice was palpable. Money was the only barrier between her daughter's life and death. "Doctor, I don't have that money. I'm alone. I'd sell everything I have and not even reach half," Laura said on the phone. "Social Security. The waiting list is 2 years. She doesn't have 2 years. She has 3 months," she argued impotently. Bureaucracy and poverty condemned her daughter, an injustice. Matthew knew theoretically, but now witnessed in the flesh. Laura was living every parent's nightmare, knowing a cure exists but unable to afford it. Matthew felt deep shame for his accumulated wealth while she suffered for money to save a life. When the call ended, Laura stared into space with the phone still in hand in a catatonic state. "My girl, my Camille, she whispered over and over, rocking back and forth to comfort herself. Matthew wanted to shout to get up and tell her he'd pay everything, but his plan kept him tied to the bed. However, his heart had already decided. He couldn't remain passive before such suffering. The loyalty and love Laura had given his family deserved to be returned tenfold. In this critical moment, Laura approached Matthew's bed, perhaps seeking the comforting presence of someone even if she thought he couldn't hear. She took his hand firmly, her tears falling on his skin, hot and full of pain. "Mr. Matthew, if you were awake, I know you'd help me." "You're good," she spoke from the heart, "but I can't ask you, it's not fair. You have your own fight." "God help me," she begged, looking at the ceiling. That confession of faith in Matthew's goodness, even in her worst moment, broke him inside completely. In the following hours, Matthew witnessed Laura's silent desperation as she tried to do the math in an old notebook. He heard her call family friends trying to sell her few valuables, receiving refusals and excuses. "Mom, I'll sell the TV and fridge." "Yes, it doesn't matter. We'll eat cold things. I need the money," she said on the phone. She was dismantling her humble life piece by piece to buy days for her daughter, sacrificing everything without hesitation. It was the purest portrait of maternal love and absolute sacrifice that moved Matthew to his core. While Laura struggled for a few dollars, Matthew recalled Valerie's talks about spending millions on trips and clothes. The contrast was obscene. His wife planned to squander his stolen fortune while his housekeeper sold her refrigerator to save her daughter. The social and moral injustice ignited a new flame in Matthew, a determination to balance the scales. Now, it wasn't just about saving his company or life, but using his power for good where it really mattered. Camille wasn't going to die for lack of money. Matthew swore that to himself and God. Laura left the room briefly to attend to the children, wiping her tears and putting on a fake brave smile. "Everything's fine, my loves. Auntie's head hurts a little, that's all," she lied to not worry them. Her ability to protect Philip and Rebecca's innocence even as her world crumbled was superhuman. Matthew admired that stoic strength. Laura was a warrior disguised in an apron, fighting invisible battles every day. He knew he couldn't let her fight alone another minute. The afternoon fell, and hopelessness seemed to settle on Laura's shoulders. She walked slower, defeated by reality. She sat by Matthew's bed again, exhausted from so much crying and impossible calculations. "I don't know what I'll do, Mr. Matthew. I'm scared, so scared of losing her," she confessed in the dim light. The fear of a child's death is a terror no parent should face, and Matthew felt it as his own. Empathy flooded him, erasing class and situation barriers separating them. Matthew mentally reviewed his bank account, seeking the quickest, most discreet way to transfer the needed funds. He had secret emergency accounts Valerie and Edward didn't know about, funds reserved for extreme crises like this. The money was there, available, useless in a bank while a girl died and a mother suffered. The solution was within reach, literally a awakening away. He knew revealing his state was dangerous, but letting Laura suffer another day was inhuman and unacceptable. That night, Laura stayed longer than usual, reluctant to go to her empty home and face her sick daughter's reality. She stayed, watching over Matthew's feigned sleep, finding peace in the shared room's silence. "Wake up soon, Mr. Matthew. The world needs good people, and I need a miracle," she whispered before leaving. That plea was the definitive sign Matthew waited for to act. The miracle she asked for was lying in that bed, and he was ready to grant it at dawn. The decision was made. The next day, he'd break his silence, risk his plan, but save Camille. A child's life was worth more than any revenge or business strategy against his wife. Matthew slept little that night, anxious for the moment of truth, rehearsing his words. A mother's cry had achieved what nothing else could, waking the millionaire from his feigned sleep to face reality. Tomorrow would be the day Laura's tears turned to hope. The next morning arrived with crystal clarity, as if the universe had aligned for the crucial moment about to happen. Matthew waited patiently for Laura to enter, hearing her heavy, sad footsteps climb the stairs at 7 sharp. She entered the room with her usual routine, opening the curtains and greeting him in a dull, lifeless voice. "Good morning, Mr. Matthew." Today dawned gray, too, she said, projecting her own sadness onto the weather. She approached to fluff his pillows, leaning over to smooth the sheets with her working hands. Matthew waited for the exact moment she was close, feeling her warm presence and agitated breathing from anguish. He opened his eyes suddenly, locking his gaze directly on Laura's surprised eyes, which froze. Before she could scream or drop the tray she held, he spoke in a hoarse but firm voice. "Laura, don't scream, please." "I need you to listen," he whispered quickly, putting a finger to her lips. Laura froze, eyes wide and mouth open in a silent scream of absolute disbelief. "Mr. Matthew, you're—" she stammered, stepping back and clutching her chest as if about to have a heart attack. "I'm awake. Laura and I have been since I got back from the hospital, but no one can know," he explained urgently. "It's a ruse. I'm faking to protect myself and my kids from Valerie and Edward," he added, seeing her try to process the information. Laura's initial shock gave way to fearful confusion, glancing at the door, afraid someone might enter. Matthew sat up in bed with difficulty, showing that though weak, he controlled his body and mind. "I heard everything, Laura. I heard how you care for my kids, how you defend me, and I heard the call about Camille," he said, staring at her. Mentioning her daughter made Laura break down, crying again, this time from mixed emotions and shame at being heard. "Forgive me, Mr. Matthew. I didn't want to bother you with my problems." "You have your own," she apologized between sobs. "You have nothing to forgive. Listen well. The money for Camille's treatment will be in your account today," Matthew declared. $280,000 and whatever else is needed. She'll have the best doctors in the city, he promised with determination. Laura shook her head frantically, unable to believe the solution to her nightmare was happening. "I can't accept that. It's too much money. I'm your employee. I could never pay you back," she said with dignity despite her need. Matthew took her hands firmly, forcing her to look him in the eyes to understand his offer's seriousness. "You've cared for what's most valuable to me, my children, when no one else did. You saved my family," he said emotionally. "Let me save yours. It's not a loan. It's thanks. It's justice." "Camille will get better," he insisted. Laura collapsed to her knees by the bed, kissing Matthew's hands and crying with infinite relief and gratitude. "Thank you, Lord. Thank you, God bless you. I owe you my life," she repeated endlessly, releasing the built-up tension. Once the emotional moment passed, Matthew explained the full situation, the plan against Valerie, the company theft, and the murder attempt. Laura listened, horrified, covering her mouth at the magnitude of the evil in that house. "They're monsters. They wanted to kill you," she whispered, feeling real fear for her boss's safety. "Exactly. And that's why I need your help. I need you to be my eyes and ears outside this room," Matthew asked. "No one can know I'm awake, not even the kids. It's dangerous," he warned seriously. Laura wiped her tears, and her expression changed, from desperation to fierce determination, like a lioness protecting her pack. "Count on me for anything, Mr. Matthew. I won't let them do anything to you or the kids," she swore bravely. "I'll keep acting normal. I'll serve those traitors coffee as if nothing's wrong," she said, assuming her role in the counter-conspiracy. They became accomplices, united by a secret that could save both their lives and families. Matthew gave her precise instructions on accessing a secret account via an app on his phone, which Laura brought hidden. They made the transfer right there. Matthew saw Laura's eyes light up at the bank confirmation. "Go to the hospital today, pay for the treatment, and have them start now. Say you got a family loan or anonymous donation," he instructed. "Don't raise suspicions with big spending here. Be discreet," he advised, thinking of every detail. That day, Laura left the room transformed. Though her eyes were red, her back was straight and her step firm. Matthew returned to his immobile position, but inside he felt more alive and powerful than ever. He had a loyal ally in enemy territory, someone who'd watch over him while he planned the final blow. The loneliness that had accompanied him for days dissipated, replaced by certainty he wasn't fighting alone. The silent pact sealed in that room was stronger than any contract or Valerie's threat. That afternoon, Laura returned with hospital news whispering in his ear while pretending to wipe sweat from his forehead. "I paid already. They start chemo tomorrow. Camille sends a thank you drawing, though she doesn't know who the angel is that paid," she told excitedly. Matthew felt a warmth in his chest worth more than all the millions being stolen from him. Knowing his money served to give life, not just accumulate power, gave his existence new purpose. The dynamic between them changed subtly. Now they shared complicit glances when Valerie entered the room to rant. Laura informed him of everything: who called the house, what mail arrived, what the kids said, what Edward planned. She became the perfect spy, invisible to the villains who considered her inferior and irrelevant. Matthew gathered the information, building the legal and strategic case that would destroy his enemies in one strike. At night, Laura brought the children to say goodnight, and Matthew felt the temptation to hug them stronger than ever. "Dad looks better today. He has more color," Philip commented, observing with sharp, childish attention. "Yes, your love is healing him. Keep talking to him," Laura encouraged, winking imperceptibly at Matthew. It was a moment of family complicity where Matthew, Laura, and the children formed a protective circle of love against the house's darkness. The pact was firm hope renewed, and the counterattack ready to begin. The following weeks were an exercise in patience and precision for Matthew and Laura, operating as a synchronized team. Matthew hired a trusted private investigator via encrypted messages on a phone Laura provided. The investigator installed mics and micro cameras in the living room, office, and garden during a scheduled fumigation. Now, Matthew not only heard what happened in his room, but had eyes and ears throughout the property. He watched on the phone screen Valerie and Edward's meetings, their premature celebrations, and fraudulent document signings. He also contacted an external forensic auditor, an old acquaintance who began silently tracking the company's financial moves. They uncovered a complex web of embezzlement dating back months, coinciding exactly with Valerie's arrival in his life. Everything had been orchestrated from the start: the courtship, quick wedding, systematic theft, and finally, the accident. The betrayal's magnitude was total. It hadn't been love. It had been a criminal business operation from day one. Matthew felt disgust, but also relief, confirming his instinct hadn't failed him. Laura, meanwhile, continued her double life: submissive employee by day, courageous mother and spy by night. She took Camille to treatments, updating Matthew on every advance, every small victory against the cancer. The girl responded well, and hope bloomed in the hospital as evidence piled up in the mansion. Laura also shielded the children from Valerie's toxicity, keeping them busy in the garden or their room. She was the human shield, preventing the stepmother's poison from touching Philip and Rebecca's souls. The day came when Valerie's lawyer brought the final papers to declare Matthew's permanent incapacity before a corrupt judge. Just this medical seal left, and in 3 days we're absolute owners of everything, Valerie celebrated with a wine glass in hand. "Edward, make sure Dr. Sure. Bellamy signs or find another who will for the right price," she ordered. They didn't know Dr. Bellamy was already part of Matthew's plan and ready to give them the surprise of their lives. Matthew decided that would be the day. He had all the recordings, bank documents, and needed strength. On the morning of the awakening, Matthew coordinated with Dr. Bellamy to come for a routine check at 10 sharp. Valerie and Edward were in the living room, relaxed and confident, waiting for the lawyer to celebrate their final victory. The doctor went up to the room, winking at Laura, who waited nervously in the hallway with the children. "It's time, Matthew. You ready?" the doctor asked quietly while preparing his bag. "More ready than ever, Doctor. Let's end this charade," Matthew replied, sitting up in bed and stretching his arms. The doctor went down the stairs with a feigned, astonished face, calling Valerie and Edward loudly. "Mrs. Sanders! Mr. Edward, come up quick. You have to see this. It's a miracle," he exclaimed with theatrical urgency. Valerie climbed, huffing, annoyed by the interruption, followed by a confused, alert Edward. They entered the room expecting a medical crisis, maybe the death they so desired. Instead, they found Matthew sitting on the bed's edge, shaved thanks to Laura, looking at them with icy eyes. "Hello, my love. Hello, partner." "Did you miss me?" Matthew said in a deep voice loaded with irony that echoed off the walls. Valerie paled to ghost-like, covering her mouth and backing toward the door instinctively. Edward froze as if seeing a dead man rise to drag him to hell. "Matthew? But the doctor said you were—" Valerie stammered, unable to form a coherent sentence in shock. "I was listening. I heard every word, every plan, every insult to my kids, and every detail of your theft," Matthew unleashed, standing up. He walked toward them unsteadily but with imposing presence that made them shrink. "I know about the $10 million in insurance, the Cayman accounts, and the brakes on my car," he accused directly. Edward tried to react defensively. "You're delirious from the blow, Matthew. You don't know what you're saying. We were just looking after your interests," he lied blatantly. Matthew pulled out the phone and played the recording where Edward confessed tampering with the brakes and Valerie laughed about it. The audio filled the room, eliminating any chance of denial or doubt about their guilt. "I have copies of this in the cloud with my lawyers and the police on the way," he informed coldly. "It's over. Your game ended, and you lost everything," Matthew sentenced, enjoying the terror in their eyes. Valerie tried approaching, crying fake crocodile tears. "Matthew, he forced me. I was scared." "Forgive me," she pleaded pathetically. "Save the tears, Valerie. You've used up your lie quota. Out of my house." "Now," Matthew shouted, pointing at the door with authority. At that moment, 2 private security guards Matthew had hired entered to escort them. "You have 5 minutes to get your personal things, nothing valuable, and get out before the patrol arrives," he ordered the guards. Valerie left screaming insults, showing her true face to the end while Edward hung his head in defeat. The house seemed to breathe relief when they crossed the threshold to the street. Laura appeared at the door with the children who'd heard the shouts but now saw their father standing and awake. Dad, Philip, and Rebecca shouted in unison, running to him and hugging his waist desperately. Matthew dropped to his knees to their level, hugging them and crying freely for the first time, releasing all tension. "I'm here, my loves, I'm here, and I'll never leave again. I promise," he assured between kisses and tears. Laura watched the scene from the doorway, crying with happiness, knowing the nightmare was over. Matthew looked up and met Laura's eyes, extending his hand to invite her into the family hug. "Come, Laura. This is thanks to you too. You saved us," he said with infinite gratitude in his gaze. She approached shyly, and the 4 melted into a hug, sealing the end of darkness and the start of a new era. The web of lies had broken, and truth, though painful, had brought freedom and justice to the Sanders mansion. That afternoon, the police took Valerie and Edward away, arrested on charges of attempted murder, fraud, and embezzlement. Matthew watched from the window as they were led off, closing a black chapter of his life forever. The house felt clean light, purified by truth and the absence of evil. Now it was time to rebuild, heal, and truly live, surrounded by people who'd proven their loyalty in the fire. The millionaire's awakening hadn't been just physical, but spiritual, and he was ready for his new life. The legal process against Valerie and Edward was swift and decisive thanks to the mountain of evidence Matthew had gathered. They were sentenced to long prison terms, ensuring they wouldn't harm anyone for a long time. With that burden off his shoulders, Matthew could focus on what really mattered: his family and Camille's recovery. The mansion, once cold and formal, transformed into a home full of life, laughter, and scattered toys. Matthew drastically reduced his workload, delegating to be a present father who missed no moment. Matthew began accompanying Laura to all of Camille's chemotherapy sessions, becoming a father figure to the girl. At first, Camille was shy, impressed by her mom's boss, but soon the barrier broke with games and stories. Matthew, Philip, and Rebecca went to the hospital as a support team, bringing joy to the sterile waiting room. The 3 children became inseparable, forming a brotherhood forged in adversity and shared hope. For Camille, having friends and a protective male figure was as healing as the medicine. The relationship between Matthew and Laura evolved from deep gratitude to a serene, mature love born of mutual admiration. They were no longer boss and employee, but life partners who'd survived a perfect storm together. Matthew admired Laura's strength, her ability to smile despite fear, and her absolute dedication to the children. Laura saw in Matthew a noble, vulnerable, generous man, far from the distant millionaire image. Dinners in the kitchen, amid laughter and food stains, became their improvised romantic dates. One day, after a successful treatment session, Camille asked Matthew if she could call him Dad, someday, moving him to tears. "You can call me whatever your heart wants, little one. I'll always be here for you," he replied in a broken voice. That moment marked a before and after. Matthew knew then he wanted to formalize that family fate had united. Laura looked at him with shining eyes, feeling life finally returned everything it had taken, and more. Love bloomed in hospital hallways and mansion gardens. Matthew insisted Laura stop working as a housekeeper and resume her studies, a dream she'd abandoned out of necessity. "You have a gift for teaching and caring, Laura. The world needs teachers like you. I'll support you," he encouraged. She enrolled in college for education, studying nights with help from Matthew and the kids. Seeing her fulfill herself professionally filled Matthew with pride. He celebrated every past exam as a family triumph. The power dynamic dissolved, giving way to equality and unconditional support. Philip and Rebecca adored Laura and Camille. For them, the family had simply grown and improved exponentially. No more shouts or coldness in the house, just understanding, loving boundaries, and lots of shared fun. Weekends, they had picnics in the garden with Matthew trying to grill and Laura laughing at his attempts. Those everyday scenes of simple happiness were the greatest treasure Matthew had accumulated, surpassing any fortune. He'd learned true wealth is measured in moments, not assets. 6 months later came the news everyone awaited with bated breath. Camille was in complete remission. Dr. Torres gave the discharge with a smile, confirming the cancer was gone and the girl healthy. Laura cried with joy, hugged to Matthew, feeling an immense weight lift from her chest forever. They celebrated with an intimate party at home with cake balloons and the feeling of winning the most important battle. Life had given them all a second chance, and they wouldn't waste it. That night, Matthew found Laura on the terrace, stargazing, thanking heaven for her daughter's miracle. He approached and hugged her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder in natural intimacy. "What are you thinking?" he asked softly, enjoying the moment's peace and her scent. "I'm thinking that months ago I asked God for shelter and health, and He gave me an entire universe with you," she replied. They kissed under the moonlight, a kiss sealing their lives' rebirth from past ashes. The love between them wasn't lightning, but a slow, steady dawn, illuminating every dark corner of their souls. Matthew had healed betrayal's wounds from Valerie, and Laura had healed scars of widowhood and poverty. They complemented each other perfectly. He gave her security. She gave him home. He gave her wings. She gave him roots. The children were the glue binding everything happy to see their parents happy and in love. The mansion was now a true home, warm and welcoming, where the past no longer hurt. Matthew began planning the next step, knowing he didn't want another day without Laura as his lawful wife. He wanted the world to know that wonderful woman was the queen of his life and home. He prepared everything with the kids' help, excited about a wedding and being official siblings. The conspiracy now was of love, with whispered secrets and hidden giggles to surprise Laura. The future shone with a promise of lasting, deserved happiness. The mansion garden was decorated with warm lights and white flowers set for a surprise that would change their lives forever. Matthew had organized a special dinner under the excuse of celebrating the first year of remission and everyone's health. Laura arrived in a simple but elegant blue dress Matthew had gifted her, looking radiant and happy. The children were unusually quiet and smiling, containing excitement, knowing what would happen. The atmosphere was magical, with soft music in the background and jasmine scent in the air. During dinner, they recalled everything lived from Coma dark days to present light, thanking each step. Matthew stood visibly nervous and asked for attention, though Laura was the only one unaware of the reason. "Laura, you came into my life at the darkest moment and lit the way when I couldn't see," he began. "You taught me love isn't self-interest. Family isn't just blood, and loyalty is the dearest value," he continued emotionally. Laura looked at him with teary eyes, intuiting where the speech headed. Matthew knelt before her, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket while the kids jumped with joy. "I love you not out of gratitude, but for who you are. I want you to be my wife, my partner, and the official mother of this tribe," he declared. "Laura Vargas, would you do me the honor of marrying me and making me the happiest man in the world?" he asked, opening the box. The ring shone simple and perfect, reflecting garden lights and Laura's joyful tears. "Yes, of course, yes. 1,000 times yes," she replied, throwing herself into his arms to kiss him. The children ran to hug them, shouting, "Long live the bride and groom," turning the romantic moment into a chaotic, happy group hug. "Now we're really siblings," Philip exclaimed, high-fiving Camille and hugging Rebecca. Matthew looked at his family, that patched family built on broken pieces that fit perfectly. He felt complete, knowing he'd made the right decisions at his life's most critical moment. Love had triumphed over greed, illness, and lies. The wedding happened months later, an intimate but beautiful ceremony in the same garden, surrounded by true friends, no press. Laura walked to the altar, escorted by Philip and Camille, while Rebecca tossed rose petals. Matthew waited with a face-lighting smile, feeling the luckiest man on earth. No excessive luxuries or obligatory guests, just people who loved them and celebrated their genuine union. It was their happiest day, the official start of their forever. At the reception, Matthew had one last surprise: Camille's adoption papers finalized and judge approved. "Camille, this is for you. From today, you carry my last name and are my daughter before the law and the world," he announced. The girl cried with happiness, seeing her new name on the document: Camille, Sanders Vargas, daughter of Matthew and Laura. It was the final seal of their union, legally integrating what the heart had joined long ago. Laura couldn't stop crying, thanking life for so many blessings. 5 years later, the Sanders mansion was unrecognizable, full of photos, drawings, bikes at the entrance, and life in every corner. Philip was now a teen athlete, Rebecca a passionate dancer, and Camille dreamed of being a doctor to cure kids. Laura had graduated and worked at a foundation Matthew created to help families with children battling cancer. Together, they'd turned their pain and experience into a mission to aid others going through the same. They weren't just happy. They were useful and generous to their community. Matthew and Laura sat every afternoon on the terrace watching the sunset with the same routine of love and peace. "Sometimes I think that accident was the best thing that happened to me," Matthew reflected one day, taking his wife's hand. "It forced me to stop, see the truth, and find you who were right there. And I didn't see," he admitted. "God's paths are mysterious, my love, but they always lead us home," Laura replied, kissing his hand. They'd found home in each other, a safe refuge against any storm. They looked to the garden where their 3 children played with the dog, laughing and running free under the afternoon sun. That image was worth more than all companies and millions in the world. It was the legacy of love they'd leave. Matthew closed his eyes a moment, thanking for that second chance to live love and be truly loved. He'd faked sleep to awaken to a life surpassing his best dreams. And so, amid laughter and sunsets, they lived their happy ending, not an end, but an eternal beginning. If you liked this story, we'd appreciate you rating it from 1 to 10. Support us with a like and subscribe to our channel, Tales of Kindness. Comment from where you're watching us. Thanks for your unconditional support in every story. Blessings to you and your family. Yeah,